Okay, making good progress here. So I hope you had a chance to check out my first video here that dealt with racial consciousness. Because if you did, you can tell me that becoming conscious of one's race, and moreover, the role that race played generally in American life, was something that kind of unfolded over time. There were certain things that Richard Wright took for granted, the skin color of his grandmother, for example, and things that he just never simply thought about. I mean, he never really thought about the white people in his world or what they had access to that he just simply did not. Now, there's another dynamic that I need you to be mindful of when it comes to this issue, and that dynamic is the expectation of whites when it comes to people of color and African American people in particular, how they would react to, their treatment, how they would react to the places that they could not go, and the boundaries that existed, the limitations on the pursuit of happiness, if you will. Let me make something very clear here. For all intents and purposes, the expectation for most of the 20th century was that white supremacy would guarantee white people a place where they could occupy socially, politically, economically, even culturally, that was superior to any person of color. That they would be given deferential treatment. That if they say the world is flat, then that was the law of the land, and to question that would be completely unthinkable, right? And could have very dire consequences. Quick example. Early on in the class, I introduced you to a concept known as the equality of opportunity. And I said, listen, it might have been paper thin, but the equality of opportunity, the idea that we can all make it if we try hard, we all have the equal opportunity to make it, it was real as long as you happen to be two things. One, white, the other, a man. It was a long shot for somebody of the working class variety to grow up and become an investment banker or president of the United States or something like that. But on paper, you could maybe aspire to be that, to do that. But we're also talking about a society that was deeply segmented, and it was segmented especially along racial lines, but also along sex lines as well. So if you weren't white and you weren't a man, then the expectation was there's a very clear limit as to how far you can go in this world. And again, that's a good example of how white supremacy is working in this time period that we're examining here. There is also ample opportunities in Richard Wright's Black Boy to interrogate this as well. And the first example I'd like us to discuss together would come at the beginning of chapter 6. So we'll open up to chapter 6. And if you've got the book that was provided by us, that would be page 136. It's the very first line in chapter 6. I'm going to take you through it, okay? So if you've read this far, you know that money is a really big problem for him. He goes hungry a lot of days, and so he's always looking for jobs that he can do and ways that he can help put, the ends together at the end of the month, and he's always looking for a job. And so the beginning of chapter 6, it starts out, it's in italic lettering. The next day at school, I inquired among the students about jobs and was given the name of a white family who wanted a boy to do chores. That afternoon, as soon as school had let out, I went to the address. A tall, dour white woman talked to me. Yes, she needed a boy, an honest boy. $2 a week, mornings, evenings, all day Saturdays. Washing dishes, chopping wood, scrubbing floors, cleaning the yard. I would get my breakfast and dinner. As I asked timid questions, my eyes darted about. What kind of food will I get? Was the place as shabby as the kitchen indicated? Do you want this job? The woman asked. Yes, ma'am, I said, afraid to trust my own judgment. Now, boy, I want to ask you one question. I want you to tell me the truth, she said. Yes, ma'am, I said, all attention. Do you steal? She asked me seriously. I burst into a laugh, not able to check myself. What's so damn funny about that? She said. Lady, if I was a thief, I'd never tell anybody. What do you mean? She blazed with a red face. I had made a mistake during my first 5 minutes. In the white world, I hung my head. No, ma'am, I'm humbled. I don't steal. Let's stop and think about the ridiculousness of that question to begin with. I mean, he had every right to laugh. It's this ridiculous, stupid question. Who in their right mind would say, yes, I'm going to rob you every single day that I get a chance? No, it's not a very serious question, but he's expected to stand there and answer it as if she asked him, "Are you 16 years of age or older?" Because I need to be able to document that. It was designed, it was assumed that it was as question that was as serious as anything else that she could ask. And so this is one very tiny example of the day-to-day lived experience that people of color were expected to endure and just simply not ask questions about something like that. Okay? This idea of being a second-class citizen, it was something that the white community expected people of color to just simply accept without any question whatsoever. Okay? Second or even third-class citizenship. Um, the job's hard. Let's be honest about something. The job's really hard. I'm a few paragraphs further down. It's a paragraph that starts out the next morning. It's the beginning of the paragraph. The next morning, I chopped wood for the cook stove, lugged in scuttles of coal for the grates, washed the front porch, and swept the back porch. Swept the kitchen, washed the helped wait on the table, and washed the dishes. I was sweating. I swept the front walk and ran to the store to shop. When I returned, the woman said, "Your breakfast is in the kitchen." "Thank you, ma'am." I saw a plate of thick black molasses and a hunk of white bread on the table. Would I get no more than this? They had eggs, bacon, coffee. I picked up the bread and tried to break it. It was stale and hard. Well, I would drink the molasses. I lifted the plate and brought it to my lips and saw floating on the surface of the black liquid green and white bits of mold. God damn, I can't eat this, I told myself. The food was not even clean. The woman came into the kitchen as I was putting on my coat. I was getting ready to go. "You didn't eat," she said. "No, ma'am," I said. "I'm not hungry." "You'll eat when you get home?" she asked hopefully. "Well, I just wasn't hungry this morning, ma'am," I lied. "You don't like molasses and bread?" she said dramatically. "Oh, yes, ma'am, I do," I defended myself quickly, not wanting her to think that I dared criticize what she'd given me. This exchange goes on for a little while longer, and basically, if you read any further, what you're going to come to the realization of is she's mad at what she sees as his indignity, right? That he's too good for this slop that she gave him, and how dare he have the audacity, have the nerve to just simply leave it and move on? It was considered a great insult. But you got to understand what's going on here. It was seen as questioning her authority and her right to do with him as she pleased. Now, this woman is not a prototypical white supremacist in the sense that it's not like she's wearing a white robe with the KKK or something like that, but it's the very casual expectation that you could do to people of color as you pleased, and they better not even say anything about it, let alone, push back against it. There's something else there, and it drives directly at this idea of the equality of opportunity. Okay? They get to talking a little bit as he's got one foot out the door and she's asking him about school, right? She says, "What grade are you in school?" "Seventh, ma'am." "Then why are you going to school?" she asked in surprise, as if he'd had all the schooling that he needed. "Well, I want to be a writer," I mumbled, unsure of myself. I had not planned to tell her that, but she had made me feel so utterly wrong and of no account that I needed to bolster myself. "A what?" she demanded. "A writer," I mumbled. "For what?" "To write stories," I mumbled defensively. "You'll never be a writer," she said. "Who on earth put such an idea into your head?" And he says, "Nobody," under his breath. So it's not just the expectation that, white people can treat people of color any way that they want to. That's their sort of right, if you will, whether it be written or otherwise. But the idea that somebody of color would aspire to be something other than, the help, right? The people that chop the wood, or the people that run the chores, or things of that variety, that was absolutely unthinkable to this woman. And that's a very good example of how white supremacy works with respect to white expectations. There's another example, even more vivid example as to, what I'm talking about with respect to this. If you go a few paragraphs further down, you get to a paragraph that starts out, fearing that my family might think, fearing that my family might think. That's where I'm starting. He's worried that his family might think he might didn't work hard enough and he needs to find another job. So he says, fearing that my family might think I was finicky, I lied to them, telling them that the white woman had already hired a boy. At school, I continued to ask about jobs and was directed to another address. As soon as school was out, I made for the house. Yes, the woman said that she wanted a boy who could milk a cow, feed chickens, gather vegetables, help serve breakfast and dinner. But I can't milk a cow, ma'am, I said. Where are you from? She asked incredulously. Here in Jackson, I said. You mean to stand there and tell me that you live in Jackson and you don't know how to milk a cow? She demanded, in surprise. I said nothing, but I was quickly learning the reality, a Negro's reality, of the white world. One woman had assumed that I would tell her if I stole, and now this woman was amazed that I could not milk a cow. They were all turning out to be alike, white people, he means, differing only in detail. I faced a wall in the woman's mind, a wall that she did not know was there. I don't know if you'd call that a glass ceiling in our day and age, but it drives at this idea that the equality of opportunity, it was just unimaginable for people to think that that sort of opportunity existed for people of color. And so, when somebody is standing in front of this woman saying, yeah, I don't know how to do that, she just simply expected that because he was black, that we are talking about the rural South. Of course, this guy knows how to milk cows and basically just be a farmer because that was the only thing that you were expected to be, right? How could you not know how to do that? Because that is your destiny in life, okay? Again, another very vivid example as to how white supremacy works with respect to expectations. Let me give you a good example from our class. And it's an example that you can find some materials, some articles, artifacts in the Sources for America's History text. Okay, the Montgomery bus boycott. That starts out in the 1950s with Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat to a white man. And as I make the case very vividly in the lecture, she was sitting in the right part of the bus. This expectation that blacks would, accept second-class citizenship on the bus by riding in the back. One more way of insinuating that you weren't good enough, right? But she's sitting in the first row of the back of the bus, and this guy expects her to simply give up her seat. And when she doesn't, everybody of the white variety on the bus is so outraged and just their minds blown that they pull the bus over, they call the police, and they haul poor Rosa Parks away to jail. This expectation that blacks would and would continue to accept second class citizenship, this was something that the white community very much took for granted. And when people like Rosa Parks began to push back against this, it blows up in this social chaos that we see on the periphery of the civil rights movement. For those of you following along with the video lectures, you know what I'm talking about. There's one more example that I want to get to before I let you go, and again, it involves expectations, but it also involves maybe the consequences of not understanding how race worked in this particular situation. So I'm on page 181, and we're going to be going into 182 as well. There's a paragraph that starts out, I had begun coping, right? I had begun coping with the white world too late. I could not make subservience an automatic part of my behavior. In other words, I can't just go ahead and shuffle. I cannot go ahead and just give you deferential treatment, right? And pretend like I don't see the way that you're treating me. I had to feel and think out each tiny item of racial experience in the light of the whole race problem, and to each item I brought the whole of my life. Now, he talks about some of his co-workers. He gets a job at a hotel eventually. And, going further in this chapter, there's a paragraph that starts out, I began to marvel, right? Here's a good example. I began to marvel at how smoothly the black boys acted out the roles that the white race had mapped out for them. Most of them were not conscious of living a special, separate, stunted way of life. He goes on, there had been developed in them a delicate, sensitive, controlling mechanism that shut off their minds and emotions from all that the white race had said taboo. Maybe the best example that I can give you to this end um, would be I think he's the hotel elevator operator that allows a white man to kick him, right? He kicks him in his hind end um, if the white man gives him a quarter. I think it's a quarter that he wants. And Richard Wright just simply cannot get over this indignity, the idea that he would allow himself to be kicked and allows himself to be mocked and laughed at for something like a quarter. But that was the expectation um, that had been bestowed upon this elevator operator. The idea that the white community expected that sort of deferential treatment. Okay, again, a good example as to what I'm talking about when it comes to white expectations. Because keep in mind, just like last time, a big part of your job is to bring information from the background material that we're learning about, bring it in and kind of integrate it into the paper. One good example is a deep cut, right? You really would have had to been paying close attention to get this, but some of you may remember this. I had mentioned Miriam Macleod Bethune, who was one of these New Deal women that Franklin Roosevelt is going to appoint in his cabinet. And she is appointed as a cabinet advisor. It was an educational role, but nonetheless, she is one of the first African Americans to serve in a presidential cabinet. And on this one particular occasion, she's walking into the White House to kind of go about her business and do her job. And one of the groundskeepers of the White House stopped her. And she's going into the White House, right? And she says, "Excuse me, Auntie, where do you think you're going?" And Macleod Bethune, just being the individual, it's one of these things where if you had that opportunity 1,000 times, you don't get it right one other time. I mean, she just nailed it. She looks this guy up and down, and she says, "I don't recognize you. Which one of my sister's children are you?" In other words, "I'm not your aunt, and I have business here." Right? You might think that the way that white supremacy works makes it unthinkable for me to enter the White House, but as a matter of fact, a sitting U.S. president has appointed me. But that certainly was the minority of examples with respect to how African Americans or people of color generally interacted with this white supremacist world insofar as it related to second class citizen treatment, right? The expectation was don't aspire to be more than anything other than labor or subservient roles. And if you do, if you even insinuate or act as if you do, right, then the consequences could be quite dire. So once again, guys, I hope that this example goes a long way with you breaking down examples in the book and understanding how white supremacy works in Richard Wright's world.